Okay, so we resume our meeting, and the panel that we have now is a panel which is in the same format that we have started today. We are having a keynote lecture, which will be delivered by Shai Shalev-Shwartz, which will then be followed by a comment by Oron Shagrir. So you can see the title of the presentation is Formalizing the Duty of Care for Self-Driving Cars. I'll very briefly introduce Shai Shalev-Shwartz. Shai is a professor at the School of Computer Science, but he's also VP VP for Technology at Mobileye and a senior fellow at Intel. And he specializes in machine learning. The comment on the presentation will be given by Oron Shagrir, who is our vice president, the university's vice president for international relations, and also a professor for philosophy and for cognition. So without further ado, Shai, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about formalizing the duty of care, and the context will be autonomous cars. The first question that we should ask ourselves about autonomous cars is whether they will be safe. And this question is, the answer is, of course, they should. But what does it really mean to be safe? So let's think about ideas on defining how to define the notion of safety of an autonomous car. And I think that the work that we did here about formalizing safety for autonomous cars may have implications on what I would like to call a regulatory science. I think that today's science is improving very, very fast. Regulatory bodies does not always understand the science. Sometimes they do. But there is a need for people that can, on one hand, understand the regulation, the law, all the considerations of the law, because we technology makers know nothing about it. On the other hand, they should understand the basic of technology, and they should not only think about how we regulate something, they should come up with novel ideas, novel technological ideas of how to regulate certain phenomena that arises in the new digital age. So maybe we will touch about this point a little bit later in the discussion. Okay, so back to safety. A first try for safety is that self-driving cars should be statistically better than a human driver. So if we accept that human drivers are on the road, if autonomous cars will be like humans from the statistical point of view, then we should be fine with them. We argue that this is the wrong answer. It's a horrible idea, even though it is being advocated by some major players in the field. We believe that it's a very bad idea. Why? First of all, it's not transparent. So suppose that you have an autonomous car. Statistically, it's like a human driver. But this autonomous car consistently hurts little kids. Okay? Why? Because they are small, something in the system do not detect them well. If you count the number of fatalities by this autonomous car, it's the same like human, because it never hurts old people. Okay? But little kids, yes, it consistently hurts. Okay? Will we accept it? Statistically, we should. But of course, we will not, because we don't understand. We don't understand what happens. Why this car hit a little kid, okay? And if we are to accept something which is completely black box, like a statistical argument, we did a statistical test, and this is statistics. So society can or may accept black boxes if there is a huge gap between the benefits of the technology and the damage that the technology makes. A nice example is airbags. Okay, so all of us have airbags in our cars. Maybe you don't think about it. Maybe you don't want to think about it. But airbags might kill people. Okay, because if it for some reason opened mistakenly in the middle of the highway, you might got scared and hit someone or fall off the road or something will happen. But we all agree to drive these cars. Why? Because we don't hear about it a lot, and we hear a lot about people that whose life saved because of airbags, or that the injury from a car accident was much less severe because of the airbags. The benefit here is much, much, much higher than the damage. So if we can, if we want to use a statistical argument, we need a huge gap between the benefit of autonomous cars and the damage that it makes, meaning that we want them to be, say, thousands of times better than human driver. And I will argue that this is impossible. So this is not a good argument. In addition, it's not a very practical thing to do, because even if someone tells you that he did a statistical test and he recorded all the driving in the cars, and he got a statistics which is similar to human drivers, because he logged how many hours from the beginning of the project the car drove itself, how many accidents were there. You do the math and you say, it's like a human driver. This is, from the mathematical point of view, this is a wrong way to measure the statistics of the system, because you don't know what are the black swans that will cause an accident. So if you want to do the test right, you need to do the test again and again and again after every update of the software. Now think about your smartphones. They got updates from time to time, right? Suppose that an autonomous car will get updates from time to time. You cannot get an update, even if you found a bug, you cannot get update before logging millions of miles and showing that the statistics of this car is better than a human driver. This is clearly not practical. Okay? So this is why we don't like the statistical approach. Okay, so if this is not good, a second try is maybe let's try to avoid accidents at all costs. We simply are not willing to be killed by autonomous cars. And you also hear these things from some players in this industry. So we argue that this is also wrong. And let me be blunt, it's not only wrong, it's bullshit. Okay? Because it means that you should stay in the garage. Why? Think about the situation here. You are driving on Begin Road in the morning. This is how it looks like, right? Suppose it's a yellow car is an autonomous car, and the red cars are driven by humans, okay? Now one of the humans spill the coffee on his legs and steers the car towards the autonomous car. The autonomous car can do nothing to prevent an accident here. Okay, so if we want to avoid accidents at all costs, the only way to avoid accidents at all costs is not to allow to be in this situation to begin with. Okay, this is the only way to avoid such an accident. But what does it mean not to allow to be in this situation? It means that stay in the garage. Okay, it's not useful. And the biggest question here, and this is maybe the real question to the regulatory bodies, is that there is an inherent trade-off between usefulness and safety of autonomous cars. This is an article about another car company that, another company that builds autonomous cars, and I didn't mention their name, but you can guess. And the report says that self-driving cars are far from perfect, and the tricks, it appears, is striking that balance between being a perfect driver and being a driver that blends in. Okay? And this other car is struggling to handle certain driving tasks and irking fellow drivers. So if your philosophy is being very, very defensive and avoid accidents at all costs, you're going to, maybe you can do it on a small scale, but if it will be large scale, you're going to block the city. And if your autonomous cars will block the city, nobody will agree to have autonomous cars on the road. Okay, we have enough traffic jams. And other companies have different solutions, and they mention our solution, Mobileye solution, which relies on responsibility-sensitive safety, and this is a topic, the main topic of this talk. Okay, so before explaining it, let's go back to this trade-off between usefulness and safety, and talk about what does the law have to say about this trade-off. So, I know nothing about the law.
Too bad.
Yeah. I tried to call my sister to ask her, but she was abroad at the time. So I had to ask the second best, which is Wikipedia. There is something that I knew in Hebrew, it's Chovat HaZeirut, and I typed Chovat HaZeirut in English to find the English term, and I found some law students of first year in Israel that have a dictionary between terms in Hebrew and in English, and they find the duty of care. Okay, great. So I went to Wikipedia to read about it. It's from tort law, and it is a legal obligation which is imposed on individual requiring adherence to a standard of reasonable care while performing any acts that could foreseeably harm others. Okay, so driving is definitely an act that could foreseeably harm others. We all agree about this one. So we need to adhere to a standard of reasonable care. How can I program a standard of reasonable care? Okay? So it's just the law. And in law, I found out that it's good to have the law being vague. And then there are many interpretations of the law by judges, by, I don't know. Okay? Great. So I'm looking for an interpretation of the duty of care law. And I need an interpretation which can I code. So it should be mathematical. It cannot be just, interpretation that I can tell you. I should also be able to tell the computer the meaning of this interpretation. Okay, so this is what we did. We built a rigorous mathematical model that gives a formalism of some interpretation of the law which is applicable to self-driving cars. Now, I'm not claiming that this is the best interpretation of the duty of care of law for driving. Maybe not. But what I would like to try to convince you that this is a reasonable interpretation, and it has many, many, many other advantages because we can make it a reality for autonomous cars. And at the end of the talk, I will try to convince you that maybe it's so good that you want even to adopt it for human drivers, but this is for the end of the talk. Okay, so in mathematics and in modeling, before we give an interpretation or before we build a model for something, we first define what are the properties of this model that are desirable. So what are properties of a good interpretation of the duty of care? So we thought about three things. First, it should be sound, meaning that it should comply with some common sense of human driving. If I will show you some scenario where something happens and I will ask you, this driver, was it careful enough? Did he apply the duty of care? So you will answer. Sometimes it will be clear and most of you will answer something. Sometimes maybe you will argue with each other and my model will say something else. I would like that my model will be somehow correlated with what you would say in the same scenario. Okay? So this is soundness. The second thing that maybe you don't think about it, but why should we be careful? We should be careful to prevent accidents, okay? So it makes sense that if everybody is careful, then there should be no accidents because everybody is careful. So a nice property of our interpretation of the duty of care is that it proves this in a mathematical way. We prove, we call it the utopia proof. Okay? We prove that if everybody adheres to our interpretation of the duty of care, then there will be 0 accidents. Okay? So this is soundness. Second, it should be useful. We can be very sound by saying that everything is dangerous, like my mother. Okay? And then it will be very sound because we will be very safe. Okay? But we will not go outside of the garage. Okay? So we don't want it. We want self-driving cars to scale to millions of cars. So if the interpretation would lead to an overcautious driving style, it will confuse other drivers, it will block the traffic in the city, and nobody will accept this solution. Okay? So this is the second requirement. The third requirement, which is specific to this law for machines, is that we should be able to implement it. Because after all, if we found an interpretation that satisfies the first two topics, but we cannot code it efficiently, then we again have a problem. Okay? So we want it to be efficiently verifiable. We want to be able to prove you that some self-driving car will always obey the duty of care law according to our own interpretation. And this is not trivial technically because of the butterfly effect. Because maybe you are doing something now which looks very innocent, but it will lead to a chain of events so that at the end it will lead to a collision. Okay? So we need to prevent it. Okay, so what is our proposal? It's a model. We call it responsibility-sensitive safety. And what we did is we took some common sense terms like dangerous situation. Okay? And we gave a formal model. What does it mean? What is a dangerous situation? If you are at a dangerous situation, what you should do? So what is a proper response to a dangerous situation? Now, this is all for the immediate. Now it's dangerous, let's do something. But a lot of the problem is because we don't know the future. Okay? So we don't know what would happen if some kid will run behind an occluded car. Okay? We don't know it in advance. So we need to be careful enough to be prepared for this. But we cannot be too careful because then we will be overcautious. So what does it mean to be reasonably cautious, like this notion in the duty of care law? Reasonable means that we need to make some assumptions. This is what we do in mathematics. If we want to define some things, we make assumptions. So the assumptions is we need to make assumptions on the unknown behavior of other road agents. So what are the assumptions that we can make and still be considerable to be reasonable cautious? Okay? Now, we designed ourselves for autonomous driving. And by design, it is provably efficiently verifiable. So we can promise you that the car will always adhere to this interpretation. But it can also be relevant to human drivers and what we call ADAS. ADAS is Advanced Driving Assistance System. Advanced Driver Assist Systems. Okay? So what we call maybe smart cars. So cars are becoming smarter and smarter, and this model can be relevant even for human driver because maybe we can enforce all the humans to adhere to this interpretation as well. And I will talk about it as well and what is the promise of this idea and can it be achievable or not. And we published this interpretation, and here I'm telling you about it here without all the mathematical details. But the paper, there is a white paper, publicly available. It's not a secret for one company. It's something that we believe should be transparent. And this is our model, and this is what we tell everybody. Why? Because we want to make the discussion whether this is reasonable or not now and not in the aftermath of an accident. Not after an accident, someone will come and will say, you should have been more careful. Well, this is what I mean by being careful. If you agree now, then after an accident, there is nothing you can say. Okay? Okay, so let's try to explain a little bit about the principles of RSS. What we did is we followed Occam Razor and we tried to find few rules that cover all the scenarios that we could think of. And we actually went to the American, what is called NHTSA. It's I don't remember the acronym, but it's like the Euro NCAP of the American type. And they have a logging of a taxonomy of 6 million car accidents. And we actually made sure that all of the accidents are covered by our model to make sure that few rules explains many, many things in the world, and this is the idea of Occam Razor. Okay, so what are the rules? First, do not hit someone from behind. Makes sense, right? Second, do not cut in recklessly, like the picture there. Okay? Because then someone might hit you from behind, but it's because you cut in, you performed a reckless cutting. Third, it's all the discussion of right of way. So if you approach an intersection and you have a stop sign, or there is a traffic light and you have red light or green light, it's all, you have different routes, and they may or may not be priority roles. Who has priority over whom, okay, in this intersection, and how you handle it. So the rule take care of an abstraction of intersections, okay, that covers all intersection in the world. And it basically says that you should respect right-of-way rules, but right-of-way is given, not taken. So if you have green light and someone else have red light, so on one hand, if it stands, someone else stands and you can go, then you don't need to be afraid that maybe it will start driving. Because even though you could have been cautious, it's not reasonable to assume that someone else is now standing in a red light and suddenly he will start driving. But if you are approaching and you have green light and someone else have red light and he's approaching fast and you calculate that he cannot brake in time, and you can brake, then you should brake because right of way is given, not taken. Okay? So he didn't obey the law and he didn't respect the priority rules, but you can do something to prevent an accident, you should. Okay? The fourth rule is about limited visibilities, which is a big deal. So you are driving in a residential area and there are parked cars, and maybe a little kid might go running behind the parked car. When do you need to be careful for this and when not? And what exactly you need to be careful for? And the fifth rule is that if you can avoid an accident without causing another one, you must do it. And it makes a lot of sense, but the negation of this rule might ring a bell, the trolley problem, okay? Because maybe you can avoid an accident by causing another one. And then this rule doesn't tell you what to do, okay? And you can discuss it later without me, because it's not interesting. Okay, so no, actually it is interesting, but I think it's a waste of time, because it's such a rare thing that, you know, it's like that airbag will open spontaneously. So things that are so rare, it's a little bit waste of time to discuss them. Okay, so but we can take it to later, this discussion, but let's talk about the first rule: do not hit someone from behind. And I will try to explain you how we build a mathematical model for such a basic rule. So it's actually tricky. Because suppose that you are driving here, you are the yellow car, and there is a car behind you that drives after you. And there is a car here, and this car here suddenly goes backward. Okay? So what can you do? You can hit it from behind, but do not hit someone from behind. You can stop, but even if you will stop, since this car is going backward, maybe you will still hit it from behind. You can go backward, but it doesn't make sense that this is what you should do, and maybe this car will hit you as well. Okay? So we need to define what to do. I'm just showing it to say it's not trivial. The solution is not very, very complicated, but just showing that you need to define it carefully. But the next bit is, I think, more interesting. What is reasonable to assume on the front car? What would happen if the front car would suddenly brake? And the question is how hard? And let me explain. So all of us in the morning, we are driving on the highway or in the city, and it is likely that someone is driving in front of us. Okay? It is very likely. Now this someone is braking very, very hard. Okay? So it will take us some time to figure out that something happened, and then we will brake as well. But maybe it will not be enough and we will hit him, because maybe we were to begin with a little bit faster, and maybe the response time, we don't have enough time to brake. This is why we need to keep safe distance from the car in front of us, right? But the question is, what is reasonable to assume on the car in front of us and what not? So modern cars roughly can brake at what we call 1G. 1G is 10 meters per second square. Okay? This is the power of braking of normal cars. But maybe the car in front of you installed fancy braking system, because this is some crazy guy that likes to play with his car, and he can brake faster at 2G. Okay? So if you save distance for 1G, and the car in front of you happens to have stronger brakes, then you will hit it. Okay? But maybe 2G is not enough. Maybe we need 3G. So where do we put the line? Okay? And the line controls a trade-off between usability and safety. Because we can say, okay, let's be paranoid and completely paranoid and say that it can brake instantly. Okay? So it can, at any moment, goes from 100 kilometers per hour to 0 to full stop. Okay? Impossible, but suppose that we take this paranoid view. The implication of this is that you will need to save a very, very large distance from this car. And then everybody will cut you. Okay? So, and nobody is doing it. None of us. Okay? As human drivers. So as human drivers, we have some intuition about what is reasonable and what is not reasonable. And what the model gives you is a rigorous way to formalize this intuition by assigning one parameter value. Okay? Likewise, maybe you are following a big bus or a truck, okay? And maybe there is here a small car that goes on the other direction. And the bus is adversarial, and it continues to go, and only at the last moment it will swerve. And then you suddenly see yourself at 100 kilometers per hour, and there is a car coming in front of you. You cannot brake in time, okay? But is this reasonable? Do we need to worry about it? Is it not cautious not to worry about it? So all of these questions need to be formalized in a very, very clear way. And this is what we are doing in the paper. Finally, we need to show how to guarantee to always obey the law. Okay? So even if we come up with the exact formalism, now we need to implement it and make sure that we always obey the law. So let me explain how we do it. Common sense, we define safe distance. The safe distance is how much distance required to avoid the collision under reasonable assumptions. And again, this is formalized. What does it mean, reasonable assumptions? Then we define a time to be dangerous if the distance is non-safe. And the proper response, makes sense, brake, okay? Now we need to make it formal, okay? So to explain you what does it mean reasonable assumptions, we just take the worst case situation and describe parameters. And I think that, does this look scary? Yes. So if it looks scary, then just ignore it, okay? It doesn't bite. And I will explain what happens here. This formula means how much distance we need in order to ensure that in the following scenarios there will be no accident. And the scenario is like this. There is car A, which is going on the rear side of car B. We say that the distance between them is safe if, in case B will start braking with maximal power, A will even accelerate for a short period of time because it doesn't even know that this car is braking. But after a short period of time, it knows that this car is braking, so A will start braking as well, okay? And then both cars will brake until they both reach full stop. If there will be no collision, then the distance is safe. Otherwise, it's not safe. So the formula is just an expression that calculates what I described in Word. So what are the parameters that we need to take into account? The main parameters is what is the response time until we figure out that something happened, and what is the maximal braking power of B. Okay? These are parameters. Once we set them, we have everything for this simple scenario. Okay? Let me skip the math, okay? Even though it's very nice. You know what? I actually don't want to skip the math because I know that you are not mathematicians, most of you. But I would like to remind you something from high school to show you the technique. So if you remember, once upon a time we were in high school, and there was something which is called inductive arguments, induction, induktia in Hebrew. So if you remember vaguely this ding, yes? Okay. So what is the idea of a proof by induction? So inductive proof is from the details to the big rule, to everything. Okay. So how do we do inductive proof? We start with proving something in a trivial situation. Okay. And then we say, okay, if we know that the statement is true for the trivial situation, let's take a little bit more complicated situation and just do the one move, okay? And then let's do something generic. Suppose that we know that the statement is true for something, and then let's do just one step. Now, if we show a generic one step, then it can go and go and go and go, and we proved everything. So induction proofs are usually about numbers. You want to prove some phenomenon on every number. You want to say that for every natural number, something holds. So you say, okay, does it hold for the number 0? Usually it's very easy to show that it holds for the number 0. And then you say, okay, suppose it holds for the number n. Does it hold also for n plus 1? If you do this step, then you are done, because then it starts from 0, goes to 1, 2, 3, etc. And this technique is exactly what we are doing here. What we are saying is that at the beginning, it's very easy to be safe, because at the beginning of the drive, we are at a standstill. You cannot be more careful than standing, right? Okay, so it's very easy to show that that you are safe when you stand still, and then yeah, but then it was not because you were not careful. We want to prove that you are careful all the time. So you start by saying that okay, if you are stand still, it is being careful, and then you are fine. And then we say okay, if I'm fine now, what will happen next? And what you show is that okay, either that you are still at a safe distance, either it's still not dangerous, or if it becomes dangerous, then before that, it was not dangerous. And then if you apply proper response, the mere definition of proper response is that something was okay before, now at the moment it was not okay, I did a proper response, and I can break in time. So I'm fine. So just to give you a little bit hint about the idea of how do we tackle to prove such claims rigorously. Okay, let me skip the rest of the rules and go directly to a demonstration. Okay, so what you see here, so this is a Begin Road here in Jerusalem. We are within a car that drives itself. All the surround cameras are shown here. So this is a front view and side view and rear view. Okay, rear side like the mirrors. And then we gather all the data, and we put it in a caricature of what's going on. This is our car, okay? We are driving on this, with our car, this is our car, yes. We are driving on this lane, okay? And here we try to perform a change of lane. Why we need to perform a change of lane? Because if we will not perform a change of lane, I think here, then we will take an exit that we don't want to take, okay? Now, the thing here is that it's rush hour in Jerusalem. If you will be overcautious, then you can block traffic here, stay forever, nobody will let you go, okay? You need to be a little bit assertive, okay? But then it's very scary to be assertive. If a human driver is assertive, okay, but a machine which is assertive, it will push its way, okay? And what will happen if it will make an accident? So this is why it's so important to put the boundaries, the right boundaries of what does it mean to be cautious enough and what is not. So we apply our RSS here, and as you can see, you can see the cars. So you can see the cars here, and you see that we had to push our way. Otherwise, here we push our way. Otherwise, nobody will let us go. Here again, now we want to go to the right side. Okay. So we decide to go here. Okay. And we accelerated a little bit, and we start to push. And you can see that the cars on our rear side, they need to decelerate a little bit in order to give us room. Of course, you don't want to push when you are dealing with some guy with a T-Max like we had here. You don't want to mess with the wrong guys, right? Mm-hmm. So the balance, you want to push, but you don't want to do something reckless, okay? Okay, so to summarize, there is a duty of care law, and the law is vague. So we need an interpretation of the law. And for autonomous car, we need an interpretation that should be sound, should be useful, and should be relevant to autonomous cars, should be efficiently verifiable. So our model does exactly this. Now, what are the next steps? I think that there are two immediate steps. One step is can we take the glove from regulatory bodies and embrace either this model or something else? But the situation right now is that the regulation of autonomous cars is basically non-existent, okay? Basically non-existent, because the regulator is afraid, he doesn't want to hurt the industry, okay? So he says, okay, I don't know, let's wait, maybe yes, maybe no. This is not good. The regulation, especially when this is life-threatening technology, regulation should be ahead of technology, not behind technology. While this is not the situation, I do understand that the technology makers have the obligations and the duty to propose something, okay? So we try to propose something. So, okay, maybe it's too much to ask that the regulatory bodies will come up with the right model of how to regulate autonomous cars. But at least they should do something and, you know, come up with ideas, collect ideas from technology makers and make the decision, okay? So this is one topic that I think is a follow-up for discussion, which is very important. The second topic is that, and this is something that we actually thought about in the aftermath of all this work on autonomous cars. The motivation of this work came from autonomous cars. But we wanted this technology, or this safety net, if I may, to be technology neutral. We didn't want it to be applied just for Mobileye, because if it will be applied just for Mobileye, then no regulatory bodies will accept to take one company and give it, okay, you are fine, all the rest is not, okay? It will never happen. So we build this model in a transparent way. It can be applied on top of the technology of any other player, okay? But then we thought, okay, maybe if it can be applied for any driving policy of any other car makers, why can't it be applied to humans as well? After all, humans make decisions how to drive. Some of them are cautious. Some of them are reckless. If we can put a safety seal on top of every driver and say that we enforce by regulation that every driver, no matter if it is an autonomous car or a human-driven car, every driver should be careful, should adhere to duty of care. This is a law, but we can enforce it because I can now install a system on top of every car that will enforce compliance with this model. And since I have a mathematical proof of utopia, I can ensure that there will be no car accidents. 0 car accidents. Now, it will cost you, but not much. Maybe $50 to $100 per car per year. This is a cost. Now comes a question to the society, how much our life costs? And I will end here.
Okay, I just want to focus on one maybe very narrow aspect of the talk, and this is a question of whether we attach, I should say here, intelligence in artificial intelligence to human intelligence. And what I wanted to argue is that with the new AI and deep learning networks, we have less motivation to attach artificial intelligence with human intelligence. But after reading Shai's paper, I'm not sure anymore. So I will not argue for the opposite, but I'm definitely less convinced. And I think, so the question is, at the end, is why we attach artificial intelligence to human intelligence. So maybe, I just give some background from the history of AI, the classical AI. So I think that it's driven by two principles. One is that the standard of intelligence is human intelligence, and we see it already in the first test of intelligence, in the Turing test. So what Turing suggests is to measure the intelligence of a machine, of a computer, by comparing it to the human being. So the task of the machine is to cause the interrogator to think that the machine is really a human being. And so this is, and I think this principle is still alive, of course. And the second principle is that intelligence is grounded in the underlying information processing mechanism of the system. This principle is actually some reaction to Turing's behaviorist definition of intelligence, and it says that basically intelligence is not just the way we behave, but also how we achieve this behavior. And this is something that, at least from the field I come in, cognitive science, it is, of course, it is a central principle. The first principle, by the way, I don't think is ideological, but at least it is practical. I mean, the attachment of artificial intelligence to human intelligence is what we see in practice, like in Turing tests, but the second principle is much more ideological. So just the reason philosophers, and I come from philosophers, so they gave some arguments why we have to think about intelligence in terms of the underlying mechanism. So for instance, the philosopher Ned Block, this is probably the most famous argument in philosophy. So he said, well, we can have, why the Turing test, behavioral test is not enough. So because if we have a fixed time Turing test, we can come up with a giant lookup table that can pass the Turing test, and this, the intelligence, this system, since it's a giant lookup table, has no intelligence at all. It's a blockhead. So the name blockhead is also for Ned Block, but also because it's not intelligent. And also, another example is from the reaction of Noam Chomsky to the fact that Deep Blue beat the Kasparov in the chess game. So Chomsky responded that a computer programs beating a grandmaster in chess is an interesting as a bulldozer's winning an Olympic weightlifting competition. And here again, what Chomsky says that the fact that the chess machine behaves like a human is not enough for intelligence. What matters is how it achieves this behavior, and like the bulldozer, namely brute force algorithm, is not giving us intelligence, and so we have to think about other intelligent algorithms. And I think that this perspective, these two principles, we still find them in the new, let's say, neural networks and machine learning, AI, at least in its earlier stages. So for instance, if we look at the literature of neural networks at the 80s and the beginning of 90s, so just to give you one example, so this is a famous neural network. It classifies mines and rocks. It tells you mines from rocks by and it's learning from examples of frequencies that come back either from rock to or from mines, and it's a new AI because we don't let the network know the rule that classifies mines from rocks in advance. Basically, the values of the weights here can be completely arbitrary. It doesn't matter what are the initial weights. It will always learn how to do this from the examples, if we have sufficient and the right kind of examples. And it does. And what is interesting is that it does it even if we don't know what is the rule that distinguishes rocks from mine. But still, if you look at what people say about such networks, so the main argument is that to embrace these networks, so one of the main arguments is that these networks are more biological plausible than classical symbolic AI. You find this kind of argument in people like Dave Rumelhart or Jeff Hinton. And what do they mean by this, that the network is more biologically plausible? The network is certainly not biological. It's not biological. What they mean is that first of all is that the information processing mechanisms look like the mechanisms that are similar to the mechanism that we find in intelligent systems. So this is the second principle, that the mechanisms matter to intelligence. And the other one is what is the system? The system is, of course, the human brain. Yeah? These mechanisms, the idea here is that there are more similarities to the way the human brain works than the mechanisms that we find in classical AI systems. So here again, we see that even in the early stages of the new AI, neural network system, we find the two principles of attaching artificial intelligence to human intelligence, and also that what matters is not just behavior, but also the mechanism. Now, and then the question is, but what about now that with the new deep learning neural network, other machine learning methods, can we retain at least let's focus on the first principle, that the standard of artificial intelligence is human intelligence? So one could argue that not. I think we can think about at least about two reasons. One is that the one that Shai mentioned is that in many of these cases, these networks are for us black boxes. It's very hard to do or very hard to specify what are the mechanisms inside them after the learning period. In the early ages, we maybe had all sorts of cluster analysis, but it becomes harder and harder to specify these mechanisms. And the second reason is that these networks, at least in some cases, they outsmart the humans in, let's say, several degrees. So for instance, unlike Deep Blue, that barely beat Kasparov, today AlphaZero, for instance, in a deep neural network system, is far better than any human player. So it seems that the answer is yes, but then, and this is now I return to the beginning of my commentary. When I look at Shai's papers, so maybe we are not there yet. Maybe we still think that something about human intelligence is important. So in this case, in the case of autonomous cars, if we assume that autonomous cars are artificial intelligence systems, and if the intelligence here is driving skills, then it seems, and this is from what Shai said at the beginning of the talk, that society will not tolerate the argument if the number of accidents is slightly better than a human driver, while the type of mistakes is drastically different. Well, the example with the children, it's not in the paper, so it's a good one, but still, I mean, one could think at least that if the number of accidents is about the same, no matter about the traffic, and why wouldn't we shift technology and move to autonomous cars? After all, we will have much more time to do other things while the car driving itself, so it is much more efficient. But still, I mean, we adhere to what humans can do, and or at least how humans behave. And moreover, it seems that at least also following Shai is that the cars we want to devise are cars that obey the what Shai calls the common sense of human driving. And here, apparently, I'm not sure that that Shai means the cognitive principles that are behind our driving. This might be too strong, but at least the principles that we interpret the human as doing by looking at their behavior. So Shai's main argument is that a good artificial intelligence system will be one that implements those principles, such as do not hit someone from behind, and the other 4 or 5 principles. So I just find it very interesting, and maybe it's open for discussion here, that we are still, when we are doing artificial intelligence, we are still so attached to human intelligence, and really, and it also comes back to some of the talks before noon, and yeah, it's interesting why we do this, and I'm not sure. I don't have an answer for this. So that's it. Thank you.
So Shai, maybe you want to respond to Oron. Why are we attached to humans as the baseline for devising these systems?
Yes. So first of all, I agree that we don't necessarily need to to be like humans if all the cars would have been autonomous, and probably we would have designed everything otherwise if all cars are autonomous. But since I believe that there will be a long period of time where there will be both humans and autonomous cars, human drivers and autonomous cars, on the same time on the road, technology should be like humans and should speak with the language of humans. You can see other areas of artificial intelligence where machines are completely different than humans, and we don't talk about them in any way that resembles human intelligence. In fact, there are cases in which machines can be much better than humans, and this is fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's open it up for a number of questions. Yes.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask how culturally biased is your technology? For example, you were talking about if we want to push our way to the left lane, nobody will let us in. Okay, I understood immediately that you were talking about Israel. In England, you wouldn't have to do that. And next, you took the database of the accident.
Going to the right in England would have some other implications.
I forgot it. And you took the database of the accidents from the States. And the accidents there are probably different than the ones in India.
Mm-hmm.
So how culturally biased your technologies?
So I believe that there will be some effect of different geographic region. We believe that the rules are universal and the differences are in the parameters. So for example, in keeping distance, what is the response time? In countries where people tend to be very mild in their driving, the response time is larger because they are not used to someone doing something that requires a fast response time. In other countries like India, the instruction for foreigners to cross the road is to just go straight without looking at anything, and all the other drivers will, and all the other drivers will understand you. if you try to negotiate with them, you will get nowhere. So the response time there may be different. So this is my answer. It's only a matter of parameters, and they can be different in different geographies. But I want to share with you something that in our development. So we developed the car mainly here in Israel, but we also have a site in Santa Clara in California, the Bay Area. I don't know if you ever visited there, but it's very different than Jerusalem. People are much nicer in their driving style. Now, the interesting thing is that we didn't have to do any modification to our car, and it worked out of the box in California. You may wonder why. And the reason is that we developed the car to push only when necessary. So if there we just turn on the blinker, and then the other car gave us room to go, please go ahead, and we didn't have to push. So this is interesting fact about, you can see it also when immigrants go from one geographic region, they adopt the driving style of the place where they immigrate to. You see that even very mild drivers, soon enough when they go to Israel or to some other place, soon enough they adapt the same driving.
I came from
aggressive
England to
driving
Israel, and I had many accidents until I adapted the Israeli way of.
It's a sink or swim system. Yes.
So you'll have in your system many rules, and I guess in certain situations there will be conflicting rules. So you have to handle this also, which you didn't address here.
Yes.
But from the regulator point of view, on what will he, how will he judge it? He will say, I look at the statistics, right? So how he will
Not
judge
our
it?
approach.
Okay.
Very good question. And actually, if you will,
I want actually to add something.
okay.
I was thinking, if you want to take statistics into account, what do you do with a situation like you have, let's say, 5 days a year, snowstorms, very bad weather situations, etc. So should the regulator, okay, we would take it into consideration. Okay, how do you deal with all this?
Okay, I will start without the snow, and then I will refer to the snow. So it's a very good point, and actually we write it explicitly in the paper. One of the modeling choices of RSS is that there are no conflicts. We design the model so there will never be conflicts between two contradicting rules. Okay, it's part of the design, and it's a big deal because it's not easy to do so. And it's not only that I'm saying that there are no conflicts, I prove that there are no
There can be
conflicts.
situations where you want to apply.
That's part of the choice. How we achieve this? We achieve this by a property of the proper response. So if you have a dangerous situation, then you should respond properly. If the proper response is built in a cumulative manner, meaning that you can have several proper responses at the same time, they cannot contradict each other, they can just cumulate on each other, then you have no contradictions. Okay? So this is for your first question. And I really think that it's a big deal, because if the model would not behave like this, we would have a very serious problem in exactly the questions that you ask. So this is for the first question. Regarding weather and the statistic, it's the same argument I have against statistics, and not to think that I actually a machine learning researcher. Statistics is our second nature. But statistics is a wrong tool for regulation, in my view. You want to take ideas from statistics, but you want for safety you want rule-based. You don't want statistics. So bad weather, it's part of the rules. You don't want to mix flat statistics, because then you are not dealing with corner cases. Okay, this is a very important thing, and I don't like statistics for safety.
Okay.
It seems to be there are two levels of safety here. One is like given the parameter readings, decide according to RSS, but the other level would be whether the car actually correctly perceives the current situation and gets the parameters to go into the system. So I'm worried that by your argument, you would still leave your car at home because you cannot guarantee the safety of that first underlying system that gives you the correct parameter readings. So do you implicitly assume that that is perfectly possible, or that any car would have to be perfect on that level? Or would you accept kind of some statistical notion of correct reading on that lower level?
Again, a great question. So all the talk was about the decision making, not about the perception. Perception, I do deal with perception with statistics. And just before I said that I don't like statistics, so I contradict myself. And I also said that there are no contradictions, so what's going on? So the thing is like this. When we're talking about the negotiation part and the decision-making part of the system, it must be rule-based. Why? Because it depends on the reaction between you and other humans. And going back to what we discussed with Oron, the reaction between you and other humans is something when you need to be like humans, okay? On the other hand, in the perception, nobody asks you to understand the world like how human understands the world, okay? We use eyes. Autonomous cars can use eyes, cameras, radars, lidars, many other technologies, okay? There is no problem of negotiation. There is one truth. There is no place for debate. What was caution, not cautious, okay? Whether there is a car here or not, it's a fact. It's not something that we should discuss as, is it reasonable to assume that there is a car here or not? Is there a car here or not? So, since it's based on facts, okay, we can go for, you should be perfect. Now, of course, it's technology, you cannot be perfect, you cannot be 100% correct, but there, it's fine to say, okay, I'm not 100% correct, but the level of inaccuracies that I have in understanding the surrounding is so small that we can neglect it. The same thing happens in designing airplanes, okay? When you design an airplane, I hope nobody is going to go on an airplane tonight, but when you design an airplane, the design parameters are that there is a probability of 10 to the minus 9, it's one in billion hours, that the wing of the car will spontaneously fall during the takeoff. Okay? That's how airplanes are being designed. Okay? Now, what is this number, 10 to the minus 9, 1 in billion? It's a number that, you know, you need to live 1,000 lifetimes, or much more than 1,000 lifetimes, 100,000 lifetimes, until the age of 100 in order to be lucky to be on this airplane. Okay? So this is what we call a negligible probability, and we're fine with it. And society are fine with negligible probabilities all around, like in vaccines, like in airbags, like in, so things that are of a very, very small probability and the damage is much smaller than the benefit, there we are fine with statistics.
Okay, Noam?
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, it was Mercedes a couple of years ago when presented with, and I know we this morning said the trolley problem is overrated, but still it was interesting. If I remember correctly, their response was, as far as we're concerned, our car will be programmed to protect the person in the car. We don't care about other people. And so I'm just curious, sort of, your thoughts on that. And then I have a question to Oron. If human intelligence isn't the right comparison, and we're using something else, what are the implications in terms of ethical principles that we want for governing AI? Does that mean we also don't use human ethics? Does that mean there are implications also in terms of a different ethical framework?
So the trolley problem, okay? So in my terminology, the trolley problem is that what will happen if you can avoid an accident by causing another accident, okay? Now, our rule is not to do this. It doesn't matter if it's protecting the car or protecting one human versus 5 or anything else. By default, you are not allowed to cause any accidents. Now, the model says that you will never cause an accident and you will also prevent accidents, but only if it means that you are not causing another accident. Okay? It's a design choice. You can argue about it, and it's fine. Tell me what you want me to do, and we can discuss it. Because I think this is an unsolvable problem, okay, the trolley problem. And I think that it's not that interesting because if you adopt the RSS philosophy, then you will never be in such a situation unless it's a very, 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 very small probability. And if it's a very, very small probability, it's like, let's discuss the trolley problem, what the pilot needs to do of an airplane, okay, when the wings fall down, and he can now crash the plane on a mountain, or try to land on the highway, causing others to die. Okay, and he has 400 people in the airplane. It's exactly the same problem, and I don't think it's interesting to discuss it because it's such a rare case that it's not mainstream.
Yeah, but I'm coming at this from another angle, and this is why I think what Mercedes said was interesting. So when you talk about the duty of care, you can be talking about the duty of care of the driver, of the car, to everyone on the road. But there's also a question of the duty of care when you're programming it towards the people inside the car.
I don't make any
and are they,
distinction.
does it apply both ways, and can these two
In
conflict?
our models, there is no distinction whatsoever between the people in the car or people outside the car.
Okay.
You are not to cause accidents. Okay? If an accident is imposed on you and you cannot prevent it,
The chips fall where they may. Elon,
Yes.
Oron.
So about the question of whether we should apply our regular ethical principles to AI. So first, I'm not an ethicist, but it seems to me, at least based on what I heard before noon, that everyone tried to somehow say how maybe we can or cannot fit our regular rules to artificial intelligence systems. Yes, so there is, I think, a prior question. I don't know what is the answer to this, but whether we should try to do it. It's a good thing to try and do this in the first place. Maybe this system we should at some point, maybe not now, but 50 years from now, maybe the ethical rules that apply to them are, very different. Yes.
Nimrod.
Shai, thanks very much for the presentation and for presenting the standard. Being a lawyer, I think that in setting the regulatory rule that you expect, or kind of like your call to the regulator, think about regulating technology, I think two observations should be noted. First of all, you kind of assume liability as if the standard you're designing is the standard for liability. That's an easy question because liability is a civil regime. Who would actually bear the cost? Mm-hmm. And assuming a very limited number of accidents that you have, you can say, okay, I will internalize the cost. The question in terms of regulation, would I outlaw your ability to set an algorithm with this standard, with this kind of like design? And it's a very different regulation because regulator can say it's criminally not allowed, or it's kind of like you can be criminally liable for that. Civil liability is something that you can make the calculations yourself. And second issue, I think you're kind of like expecting from regulators of technology something that systematically they show that they are not capable of. Regulators of technology kind of assume that technology, in order to replace humans, have to be perfect, not less than perfect. So if you give the example, everybody knows that a lie detector would be much better than a judge in resolving a case. DNA would be much better than any other evidence that we have to resolve the case, but still, the issue always at court, whether it's perfect. And if it's not perfect, the law says, okay, we cannot trust this system. We've never been in a situation where the law said, okay, it's just significantly better than what we've done before, so let's accept the technology. So I think in terms of technology regulation, the standard you're expecting would be very different than what we saw so far in regulating technology.
So first, I agree with you that civil liability is of a minor concern, but the real question that here is where I expect regulators to say the word is, I want an embracement of, for example, this model means that nobody can argue that we were negligent in letting this car being on the road. Okay, this is what we more worry about, the negligence, because you can say, okay, your car can kill. That's true. That's true. It can kill. I explained what I do in order to prevent it to hurt someone. Okay, but there is a trade-off. Now, somebody tomorrow, after an accident, can say, you were negligent. This is not, you should have been more careful. Okay? Without formalizing in advance, what does it mean to be careful enough? How can I put a car on the road? And this is where I expect regulators, by embracing the model, they should say, okay, this is careful enough. I'm not saying that we don't have liability, okay? We do have civil liability, okay? If you hurt someone, even if it's not your fault, maybe you have civil liability, but you were not negligent, okay? And this is what I'm trying to achieve, okay? Another point that I would like to raise, and I agree with you that historically regulators did not like this job of regulating things, and they went to the more pessimistic view and say, okay, we will say that something can replace human if it's completely 100% perfect and not less. Well, even if this is the situation, I believe it's wrong. I believe it preventing a greater good for society. And I'm trying to say, hey, this is wrong. Maybe I'm fighting a lost cause, but I hope not.
But it pushes you to strive for being perfect, no?
That's always a strive.
So now let's collect a few comments, and we'll have a final round of interventions. Yes, please.
A short question. You mentioned at some point that if your system was designed for only autonomous vehicles, it would be different than designing with other drivers. Could you elaborate on why a system designed for other drivers wouldn't be even better with only autonomous vehicles?
Just a very.
We're collecting this. But okay, it's fine.
So I need to remember.
So you need to remember. Do you need some? Do you want to respond and remember the other? Do you need a?
I can write down.
You can write down. Okay. So Oren.
So I apologize, I missed the beginning of the lecture, but I'm just wondering, as I'm listening to the exchange, we're talking about the interpretation of the duty of care, and I'm wondering about what's going to happen to the interpretation of duty of care in the next step. That is, once we have autonomous cars, would that mean that, for example, if I go and get into a car and put my hands on the wheel, am I negligent per se? Because I am raising the risk of accidents. So is the duty of care basically going to go, taking it back now from the autonomous back to the humans, right? Are we going to get to a situation where once we have autonomous vehicles, that humans actually are not supposed to drive?
So there's a
a
tipping point. Okay.
Right.
So Gadi.
Two questions. First is, you try to balance and you try to reach efficiency and what you call reasonableness by giving value to each parameter. But that has something to do with morals. You think that something is worse than another. Does it mean that actually Mobileye had, while creating the RSS, had moral decisions, whether it was in your peer review or should it be done by the state? And the second thing is whether your duty of care, the one you defined, is the minimal one or the standard one, whether, I think the moment it's more than the minimum, whether it becomes a standard, I think maybe first it may be anti-competitive, and an antitrust problem isn't in and of itself, because maybe safety should be a commodity. I want to buy a safer car or a more efficient car, and the state should make the minimum. And the second is, it may be not good for society, because maybe Mobileye has a good model, but maybe Volvo will have a better model for a duty of care, which may be a bit more efficient than yours. So I was wondering what was your point there.
Okay, we take two more and then we find Locke.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the slipstream of this comment. I see regulators never wanted to set a standard because state-of-the-art moves on, and they always want you to move on with the state-of-the-art. So you cannot expect. You will have to look at what is the best possible and then try it out. They will never give you your answer. So I just want to. The other question or issue I had is that I see if you start asking people what would you, to try to figure out the ethics, what would you do in the trolley? Do you do this or do you do that? And then apparently if it would happen on the floor, they would make different decisions than they would give you answers in the queries. And I wondered whether you had any experience there and whether you looked at that. Just wondering.
And Amit?
Unfortunately, right, it's one of the things we mentioned here before, but it's about the role of, say, social institutions in what you just described. It seems to me that in the beginning, like many other technical advancement, relied on other authoritative source of whatever, truth or ethics, or the laws, or that big data of car accidents. But at the end of your conversation, you presented your technical advancement as an institution. So now you see this RSS model as an institution of common sense of human driving, right? This is a source of authoritative truth of how it is to, what will be the best way to drive, to take decisions while driving. So is that what you're saying? Are you seeing yourself or your like, or the, you know, as future institutions of designing, social order?
And I have my own very brief question on the issue of the. It's a follow-up really to the first question about human intelligence and the fact that the system has been created to function in a human-machine environment. And the question is whether we are not now pegged to a certain path dependency, which will have significant cost going forward, because the machines are still pegged. I mean, they still have the limits that we have for humans. So, for instance, red lights. You don't need red lights in a system which is fully autonomous. But now we may be stuck forever with red lights, even when there will be no more humans who would need to wait at the red light. So I'm wondering whether, I'm sure there are many other examples, whether the transition could be, when you go only autonomous, can you make the transition? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have now...
Okay, so I think I summarized everything. So how different the future will be when all the cars will be autonomous? It will be very, very different. It could have been very, very different. For example, you don't need red light, and I connect these two questions. In computer science, there is a problem which is well studied and well known, which is a shared resource allocation problem. Okay, you have a shared resource like a printer. Okay, and there are many users that want to use the shared resource. And the question is how you allocate the shared resource to the different users. Okay, now if you think about an intersection on the road, it is a shared resource, and there are users, cars that come in from different directions that need to share this resource. And there are many algorithms for how to share a resource. And one of the worst one is what is called time sharing. Time sharing meaning that there are intervals of time in which one user can use it, and another interval in which other user can use it, etc., etc. Think about a printer for your, 100 people in the office, and you will say, okay, Oron can print from 8 to 8:05 in the day. Okay, this is the time of Oron. Okay, and everyone gets a slot when it can print. It's a horrible idea. Unfortunately, this is what we do with intersections on the road. Okay, why this is how we do it? Because we are limited to what human can understand. And humans are very bad in understanding the notion of sharing. We work very hard on our children to make them know how to share.
Exactly.
Okay?
Sharing is caring.
So definitely, things would be much different if we design the network of roads more like the internet. Okay, it would be much more efficient. But why do we restrict ourselves to the current system? Because we believe that technology is impossible to make progress if you require an infrastructure change. So if we say there is no intermediate period when there will be just autonomous cars, so we need to design autonomous cars separately on a separate infrastructure.
You have different lanes.
Yeah, different lanes, and only when you have your lane, then you can drive there. These things take forever and are not very, very practical in advancing state of the art. Therefore, we have the limitation that we have the current infrastructure, and the question is, can we make the transition while playing in the same rules with humans? Okay. Okay. So someone mentioned about the fact that human driving is not safe. I don't remember what I wanted to say about it. Okay, let's continue. Oh, sorry whoever asked it. I don't remember what I meant. Moral of setting the parameters. This was you, right? Okay. So yes, it's a moral decision. It's a moral decision which is much more interesting than the trolley problem. This is a real moral decision to make. Okay? Think about a residential road. Okay? A kid can run behind a parked car and you will hit him. Okay? Now, the regulation today made a moral decision by setting the speed limit. It's a moral decision. Because if you will say that in a residential area you will not drive faster than 30 kilometers per hour, then there will be less casualties and serious injuries than 50. Okay? And by the way, there is a Swedish Vision Zero decision of the parliament in 1997. They decided that by 2020 there will be no fatalities and serious injuries from car accidents in Sweden. Okay? I don't think they are there yet, but at least they have the strive to be there. Now, one of the means to achieve this is to lower the speed limit. Okay? Of course, lowering the speed limit has implications. What are the implications? Usability. So it's exactly the trade-off between safety and usability. You can make the road safer, okay? But the price will be that the road will be less useful. Same way, if you talk about intersections, when you take, in the US, you take a left turn, okay, in an intersection, at the same time that there is through traffic. Or in Israel, you take a right turn, and there are pedestrians that have that can go at the same time, and you need to yield them. So it's a moral decision. It's more useful, less safe, for sure. You can see the statistics. It's less safe. Okay? Now, it's a moral decision. I don't think it's our role to set this moral decision, but we give the means to set the moral decision. We give the model. Now, setting the parameters, this is why I hope that it will be a decision of the society, because it's really a moral decision. Okay? And I hope that regulators will agree with this statement, because the alternative is that I will have to set these parameters. If the regulator will come to us and will tell us, I don't know what to do, you do whatever you want, I agree. Okay? Which brings me to state of the art. Okay? regulators will never set a standard because it's not state of the art. That you raised this issue, right? I disagree. I think that you cannot achieve more than no accidents, and this model achieves no accident if you implement it correctly. Okay, it's hard to beat it. So I think this is a place where you don't need to be afraid that there will be a better technology. You can say that maybe you want to ask for more, and someone asked about, is it a minimal one or a standard one? Okay, so yes, it's a minimal one. I don't think this is all what we can do about safety, and we are doing much more. But I think that it's a very good minimal standard. Okay, do not cause accidents. It's a good beginning, right? So we should at least embrace the beginning. The fact that maybe you will want to ask for more is no excuse to do nothing now. Okay? About safety is a commodity. I think not. Okay, I don't like the approach that if you have more money, then you will buy more safety. Okay, especially when it comes to you might hit someone else, a pedestrian, and then what? Okay, it's not, the car is not yours at all. Okay, so of course we should not tell people you cannot do more than RSS. You can do whatever you want, but some standard, some minimal requirements must be standard, must be for all. But this is my opinion, of course. Okay, someone mentioned about asking people about the trolley problem.
Yes. Well, I said you see people answering questions and behaving in reality totally different, and I wonder whether you did research on.
So I think that moral questions are not a matter for democracy. It's not a question of what the majority will do. If the majority will say to do something not moral, then what? We should do it. So I don't like at all this direction. There was a study in Harvard about the trolley problem. They had a computer game and they led, will you kill the 4 people? And I hate this study. Okay, sorry, because what? So what? So the majority of people will prefer to kill older people than younger people. Does it make it moral? Okay, seeing myself as a future social institution. I never thought about myself as a social institution. But I do think that there is a place for a new field of science, which I call regulatory science. I think that there is a program of the Hebrew University which is relevant. I believe that this is going to be a big deal in the future. I think I tackled at least most of the questions.
Exhausted the question. Oron, do you want to add something?
No, I'm fine. No, just maybe one comment that I mean, I certainly see why, practically speaking, it's good to have like a rule-based, human-like system. I'm not sure that humans themselves, would prefer driving that it's like this, because there are like systems like human-machine interacting systems that in which actually the humans prefer the computer because it is different. So there is, for example, now like psychological treatments by computers. There is a robot in Stanford that treats people, through the interaction. And actually, many people, prefer this to the interaction with a real human being for some obvious reasons. But as I said, I completely see why you think practically about the regulator and what they think.
Okay, please join me in thanking Shai and Oron. Thank you very much.